terminology and concept should be a precision tool for capturing, consolidating and sharing knowledge, tool for thinking, a tool for supporting disciplined innovation and creativity, planning, education and training, articulating theory, pulling theories together, because most crime prevention theories are kind of one-shot theories, whereas in real life obviously lots of theories come together and interact. Communicating and collaborating with colleagues, perhaps across different organisations, different disciplines, certainly internationally. So it requires a suite of clear definitions and clear map of institutions in a fairly generalised way, so you're not, say, linked to the institutions of New South Wales or even of Australia or the UK, but ones that step back in a slightly abstract way, so you actually know what you're talking about when you talk to, say, somebody in Singapore or wherever. Existing guidance and knowledge frameworks. You're probably all familiar with SARA of problem-oriented policing, scanning, analysis, response and assessment, and with the crime triangle, victim and target, place and offender. These have actually been great as startups to quickly get people going on crime prevention ideas, but very soon, once practitioners start to get into the field, they find them very constraining, very limiting in guiding their thinking. SARA is very simple and easy to learn, but it's not got enough detail to organise the knowledge, especially at the response stage. And response is a huge set of activities, but just calling it response, very amorphous, and it doesn't really think about causal mechanisms, and doesn't have this sort of principles and methods divide. The crime triangle, instant learning, very good, but practitioners, once they've got into the field, they really feel limited by it. And the people in situational crime prevention and problem-oriented policing particularly, they kind of limit their own leading edge thinking also. So it really restricts their research capability, I fear. And this is perhaps a slightly unkind image, but it's like a wardrobe with no shelves or hangers or drawers. You shove all your knowledge in there, you cram the door shut, and then, when you go to the wardrobe and you want to find some socks, the whole lot comes out in a great big heap and you're scrabbling for it. So, the other image is sort of hanging knowledge baubles on the Christmas tree. You know where to hang it, you know where to find it. So that's the specification, and that's also the slagging off the existing frameworks. So I hope that doesn't mean anything too unfortunate over here. Elements of the new framework are these. First of all, trying to do some work on crime prevention definitions, about activities and institutional settings. I won't talk too much about institutional settings at the moment, but I do say that the frameworks that I've designed do try and bridge that gap between the crime prevention in the civil world of everyday life and industry and so on, and crime prevention in the formal, the crime prevention dimension of policing and law and order and justice. Five Eyes is the process model covering know-how. It's kind of language and a map for describing all the different tasks of the preventive process and hanging all that good practice knowledge on it. And the final bit is the conjunction of criminal opportunity, which is an attempt to beef up the crime triangle. In fact, it's got 11 branches, so it's kind of the crime undecagon for classical scholars. Any classicals? No. And it's a kind of conceptual framework to map, on the one hand, all the immediate causes of criminal events, and on the other, interventions in those causes. So that will show up in a minute. So an attempt to define crime prevention here. Ethically acceptable and evidence-based advance action intended to reduce the risk of criminal events. And you can say this, you can carry on to say this in two different ways. On the one hand, you can say by intervening in their causes, or in an alternative discourse. specific reference to different discourses, different frames of reference is another thing I've learned from designers. You can say reducing the risk of criminal events by frustrating criminal goals, disrupting activities and organisations directed towards the pursuit of these goals. So on the one hand it's thinking in terms of cause and effect, and the other it's thinking about active offenders and offender organisations. And I tend to do definitions in depth, so I don't just leave it at that. I will go on ad nauseam, talk about what we mean by risk, for example. That's possibility, probability and harm. When I say causes, I'm actually including risk and protective factors, which are used a lot in the offender-oriented and early intervention side. But they do, I mean, if risk and protective factors don't actually include causes, and there's no point in actually trying to manipulate them. This was an attempt to define community safety as an aspect of the quality of life, which I worked with there was a sort of training and curriculum committee in the Home Office some years ago, wide range of stakeholders. We collectively came up with this state of existence where people are sufficiently free from or reassured about a range of real and perceived hazards and harms, able to cope with those which they experience. If they can't cope, they're protected from their consequences, for example by victim support or insurance. And all this allows them to get on with the necessities of their social and economic lives, to exercise their skills and to create and enjoy wealth in the widest sense. There's, this got quite widely used, but there's a very sorry tale typical of the Home Office and probably elsewhere in government. About 3 years ago, suddenly they came up with a new national community safety strategy. That definition had vanished, and they came up with an absolutely appalling amateur attempt to put together a definition which just talked about sort of social intervention and so on. So this tool kind of completely vanished. Shame on them. So finally, the 5 Eyes. And there is actually a poem called The 5 Eyes, which I won't inflict upon you here, but see me afterwards if anyone's interested. This is a slight clue. So actually I should take you through those, shouldn't I? Yeah, intelligence is about causes, consequences, patterns, crime. Intervention is what you do about it. Implementation is how you actually make it happen in practical terms on the ground. Involvement is the people side of making it happen, and that is quite often the hardest thing in crime prevention. Impact covers both impact and process evaluation at the end. So you can see there's quite a clear overlap with SARA at this level: scanning and analysis for intelligence, response. This is where we differ most: response through intervention, implementation, involvement. So we break up that amorphous pattern of SARA into these details, and then it goes into more detail progressively. So the 5 Eyes is the slogan that you can instantly communicate to people. Each of the eyes has a series of subheadings which I've worked on quite a lot. And methodology is how you actually do the detail under the various subheadings. There is another level which is the meat, but for vegetarian purposes maybe I should change that. This is sort of inclusive design.